Alright, since we are in the middle of the summer of sequels, I went ahead and decided to add a straight-to-DVD sequel while we were at it to this, as well as a couple of other movies that I saw a while back that I've just now decided to put on something, so I should probably talk about them before I completely forget about them, which is totally possible. And yeah, so we're gonna go into Jurassic World, Fallen Kingdom, which I've been a little excited to talk about, or for it to get here to talk about, before I even knew what the quality was, because I seem to remember a few years ago when I reviewed Jurassic World when it came out in 2015, and I really didn't like it, and people really didn't like that I didn't like it. I heard from quite a bit of people, none of which were very happy with me, so I was very curious to see what I would think of this, and I did try to go an open mind, even if I didn't like the last one, just to see what happens, and the potential reaction to what that might be. Hopefully nobody gives a shit anymore, because I think people have kind of come around on the idea, or at least some people, that maybe Jurassic World wasn't all that great before, and that, yeah, so anyway, we will go into this sequel, which kind of immediately I was a bit concerned just from the start, because just maybe I've seen too many horror movies by this point, but just with the setup, I was kind of afraid we were gonna like a piece of my mind kind of thought we were gonna jump the shark like really early. When we have this sort of Bill Paxton and Titanic-esque expedition into the water, where we saw the Indominus Rex pulled in at the end of Jurassic World, and they're looking for the remains, and of course, for some reason, my immediate thought was, is this going to be like a Friday the 13th thing, and they're going to like tamper with its corpse and somehow bring it back to life? But no, it's just a pile of bones at this point. And that inevitably sets off our plot. That's basically the thing that keeps the plot moving, is this bone from the Indominus Rex that they get and they take to James Cromwell's little place or whatever. And this whole thing brings us, interestingly enough, back to the idea of what Hammond was talking about in The Lost World. This whole idea of basically putting the dinosaurs in their own place and just us letting them live there without our interference. There's actually a lot that brings it full circle to The Lost World in this. I guess there's something about the second installment in each of these that brings that out. So, as we're going into this, and of course we're gonna bring back. They find a way to bring Chris Pratt back into this by way of Blue, the raptor that he trained and all that. And so that obviously means that when he and Bryce Dallas Howard reunite, we do have to put up with the forced banter yet again. The very tired banter that brings us to lines like, your skin looks nice. So we do have to deal with that for a little bit. Thankfully, they don't dwell on it as much as I thought they did in Jurassic World. I don't know whether I have to call it the first one or what, but just Jurassic World. So, but thankfully they didn't dwell on that too much. So going into that also, we're once again bringing the kind of series together, or continuing to, by bringing back Jeff Goldblum in one of the opening scenes. Predictably, I mean, as much as it sucks, I think we all knew that this scene that we knew he was in is pretty much his only scene. But what I did like about this scene was how... Well, one of the things I was a bit concerned about was how Jeff Goldblum's been so busy lately with stuff like Hotel Artemis and Thor Ragnarok and all this other stuff. And it's like, he's obviously been in this area for a while, to where when you see him play a character, you pretty much just see him. So it was like, I feel like it should be a big deal that we're going to see Malcolm again after all these years, but at the same time it's like, well, we're really just going to be looking at Jeff Goldblum, so it probably won't even feel all that special, unfortunately. Yet somehow, he did find a way. I don't know if it's because he's, playing it really straight or what, but you can kind of tell that he's in the character of Ian Malcolm when we see him, even if it's only briefly and for this one scene. I never really felt that concern that I had going in of, is it just going to be, Goldblum's face and nothing more. But no, it does kind of feel like we're actually seeing the character again, with this obviously change in environment and the events as they have transpired. And it is really interesting to watch him talk about where we've gotten to in regards to this volcano that's going to go off and ultimately destroy the island and the dinosaurs with it. And it brings back his character in that way to where he basically always kind of had that stance of like, if you fuck with nature, nature's gonna fuck with you back no matter what. Um, the life finds a way thing and all that. And yeah, and it actually perfectly fits here to where he's basically saying, like the way he was saying, nature, in the first movie he was saying nature will make this escalate, whether you think you've planned it to not do that, nature will make sure that does happen. And so he brings that to this point with the volcano to where he's the one they're basically debating, like, should we let the dinosaurs live or die? And he's the one saying, it's nature's doing its thing. For the love of God, let them die. Let nature do what it so clearly wants to do, so we don't fuck with this any further. Um, and then, yes, he disappears to, like, the very last scene of the movie. So, that's unfortunate. I feel like we actually could have used more of him, especially in these circumstances, but even a little bit of his presence is appreciated, so there is that. And there are some other things to appreciate in here, like, another thing towards the opening is this whole thing of, like, seeing news footage where they're basically talking about us seeing the extinction of dinosaurs, but they're talking as if this hasn't happened before. So that looked kind of interesting in this modern setting. But then, of course, it does become a Jurassic Park sequel, more or less. We have some very standard villains here. We have Rafe Spall doing he's basically kind of sort of going back to the territory of Arliss Howard in The Lost World, where he's the one that's, like, connected to the guy that kind of started all, because with Cromwell being the former partner of Hammond, and he's the one that kind of works for him, but he's not so secretly a villain. It's one of those cases where, I mean, we are kind of putting the pieces together pretty quickly, but, like, it seems to be the real reveal of him being a villain is that he yells at a child. And so it's like, that's, even no matter what he's saying, that's the part where it's like, oh yes, he's clearly supposed to be a villain. Despite all the other things he's doing, no, it's yelling at a child that makes it seem like, yes, this is the guy that's untrustworthy. And they also bring, kind of late into the game, they bring Toby Jones into it as well, which goes into a whole other territory. But, yeah, just the standard villains. But not only that, there's also a really lame new crew, if you can call it that. It's basically two people. Where we have the girl who is... She's basically, like, her character's the type of character that seems to be acting really tough, and I think we're supposed to buy it as that. The trouble is it almost seems like she's coming off like she's trying way too hard to, like, compensate for something, and I think that whole compensation thing is the fact that we're supposed to buy her as a former Marine, when you look more likely to find her, like, playing the acoustic guitar on the sidewalk in a college town. So there's that character, but then there's also the other one, which is basically comedy relief character. This is the guy where it's supposed to, I guess, be hilarious, where he's the type of guy that offers bug spray to military guys, which I guess is hilarious or meant to be or something. Screams like a girl, that guy. So we do have that, and the character work obviously isn't particularly strong, which is not going to help things, but in these type of movies, there's so much more that they could have to offer to where it's like, well, if they do this thing poorly, as long as they do this thing right, then we'll probably still be okay. But it's stuff that feels like very scenes that could have been good, but they just feel so rushed. Like this moment when Chris Pratt is, like, hit with a tranquilizer and, like, paralyzed, and he's laying there as, like, lava from this volcano is coming at him, as well as a bunch of dinosaurs as well. And it's like there's like room for genuine suspense here. It's like the perfect setup where he can, like, barely move his body, and he basically, like, has to, like, contort himself to, like, get away from it. But as this scene starts to kind of work a little bit, this thing wears off like really fast, so that he can get right back up, and you kind of lose what the whole setup of the scene even was. So it's unfortunate when they do stuff like that, and then they're really starting to kind of taint the power of some of the previous things that worked, like kind of well, this worked before, let's just keep doing it again. I think every movie in the Jurassic Park series has that scene now when we think that the heroes might be in trouble, or there's one particular dinosaur that's getting ready to kill everybody, and then the T-Rex comes in and, like, saves the day and shit in this big badass way or whatever. That's... The more you do that, the more it's, like, really losing its magic. I think he even does it more than once in this one. So that's, like, that big moment when he stopped the Raptors in the very first movie, and it was, like, one of the big moments in cinematic history. Just the more you do that, the less impact it's going to have, and at this point you've pretty much run it entirely dry. Which is such a shame, because that was such a strong aspect of, like, even when they kind of brought it back in the other movies, sometimes the magic was still there a little bit, but it's completely gone at this point, unfortunately. And yeah, you're gonna have... I'm sure people will get much more into the specifics of this, especially as time goes on, because people love to, like, nitpick and then repeat every time a movie's brought up. Just to kind of put it in general terms, this is a movie that's got a lot of, like, really dumb shit in it. But and at first I wasn't really caring that much, because outside of the first movie, this hasn't exactly been a totally brainy series to begin with, so I think it's kind of expected at this point. But, yeah, just as it goes on, it does kind of seem like... It's not so much I mind that it's dumb, it's the fact that the dumb stuff almost seems like it's really obvious it's the writers being lazy and just trying to get from one point to the other as easily as possible with as little conflict as possible, because that would require more thought. So it's like, this is one of those cases where even if, no matter what we're looking at, whether it be like this science lab with all this, potentially world-ending shit in it, just everybody has, like, really easy access to. There are, not just necessarily the Pratt being paralyzed scene, but other moments where it's kind of like, they keep taking the easy way out of certain scenarios, and the way they get out of these situations is, like, probably much more dangerous. They're making the situation they're in even more dangerous than it already is, when it's in the context of the movie saving them. So a lot of that feels really senseless. And there's also, obviously, as we go on, they're, like, really amping up exactly what they can do to the dinosaurs and what they can add to them, and it's like, the modifications to these dinosaurs are getting so laughably overly elaborate, and so, yeah, but I don't know what's spoiler territory and what isn't, so I'm kind of half trying to be vague, but half point out what the problem is, but yeah. And as I was saying, I think one of the more criticized entries in this series is The Lost World, and there is a lot of The Lost World in this one, so I'm not quite sure how people will take to this. But, like I said, like, the whole setup is very similar, like, brings us back to that territory that one started. There's the whole... where the villains are basically coming from a greedy... area feels like it was very much already explored in that. It comes back in this. Like I said, the Rafe Spall character can easily be compared to the R.L.S. Howard character in that movie. And, yeah, and as I said, not to say too much, but if you kind of wait around as the movie is finishing out, there's something else that kind of brings about memories of The Lost World as well, so there is that. And naturally, they try to bring a twist into it. If you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. And, yeah, that's one of those things where it seems like it should be, like, a really big deal, but at the same time it does feel like, good God, they're trying to take this way too far, and, like, the farther they take it, the dumber it's getting. But not only that, is as big of a deal as this twist is, does not seem to be much of a point to it. It's like they mention it a couple of times, and it's it's like the driving factor in a crucial moment. But it's also like probably one of the dumbest moments in the movie, so that just seemed ill-advised all around. So yeah, now I tried to be like, on board with it for honestly a good portion of the movie, like probably just a little over half of it. I was liking it more than the one that came before it, but yeah, just as it kept going, it's like it was intentionally finding ways to be dumber the farther it went. They were trying to outdumb themselves with every new scene by the end. Um, but like I said, it's hard to get too bent out of shape about that because, like I said, apart from the first movie, it's not like this series is known for how smart it is. So it's more all about just the big factor of it, and the people just want to see dinosaurs wreck shit, and you do get that. But yeah, that can only go so far though. So it's, yeah, and like I said, you're always going to have expectations, especially when you go back and look at the brilliance that is the first movie, and yeah, so that just basically is what it is. So I'm sure people will probably get out of it what they want out of it, but I don't think it'll have like much staying power or anything, and it'll kind of hope what I've kind of seen with Jurassic World. It'll like there'll be an initial high, but then it'll wear off over time for sure. So yeah, but I guess we'll see. I could be totally wrong because, like I said, my opinion of Jurassic World was not very popular a few years ago, so we'll see what happens. But let's make Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom start to look good by talking about Escape Plan 2. Hades is the subtitle. It's, give them credit. It is a straight-to-DVD sequel. Let's give them credit for their enormous restraint not calling it, like, Escape to Hades or something. Even though that wouldn't make any sense, but this movie is not about making sense, so I wouldn't put it past them. The interesting thing about it, though, was that when I looked at it, like when I saw like the first poster and I heard about its existence, I was a little surprised actually that it was straight to DVD because Stallone came back, and even though they didn't get Schwarzenegger back, but they put Batista on the poster. So it's like Stallone and Batista. These are theatrically released names here. You put those on the poster and you've got something. So it was weird to me that it went straight to DVD, actually, even if, you look at the director who they changed, and now it's the director is the guy that did, like, 3 of those straight to DVD Bruce Willis movies. So it starts to make a little more sense as it goes, but then, yeah, once you actually see the movie, even though it's got Stallone in it, even though it's got Batista in it, yeah, after laying eyes on it, it's absolutely 150% a straight-to-DVD movie from beginning to end. Beginning with one of those, really tedious, suspenseless opening action scenes that really doesn't have much to do with anything. And another problem here is that I talk about that Stallone actually came back, and he's, the big name on the poster and everything, but yes, this did find a way to do the sequel thing to where it's like, yeah, Stallone's in it, and yeah, we've got a big name like Batista in it, but let's focus on the characters that we really don't give a shit about and kind of make them the focus, and the other guys just kind of the background characters. 50 Cent came back, too, from the first movie. I don't know if he's somewhere in there where it's like, it could be theatrical released, or it could be straight to DVD if 50 Cent's in it. It's really hard to tell. But, yeah, they basically take a back seat for these new characters, for the proteges, which is always a winning concept, isn't it? Especially in a straight-to-DVD sequel. One of these guys is Jesse Metcalfe, John Tucker, and John Tucker Must Die. Winning casting here, isn't it? The villain, like the main villain, looks like, like they plucked somebody from, like, the first Twilight or something. They slapped a beard on him, and they're like, this guy looks threatening enough, doesn't he? For a straight-to-DVD sequel, at least. They do have another villain in here that's Titus Welliver. As this is one of those movies that really likes to throw around its terminology, so it's like they have this area where the prisoners just fight that's called the zoo, and Titus Welliver is the one that looks over this, so he's the zookeeper. It's not particularly... I mean, he's okay in it, of course, because he's Titus Welliver, but I mean, it's not particularly threatening terminology. So it's like, I suppose, once again, at least it's not called, like, Escape Plan 2, Welcome to the Zoo, or something. They totally could have done that, and I'm a little surprised they didn't, but, so good on them for at least not doing that. And yeah, so we basically focus on these characters that basically work for Stallone. That would have just been side characters in another movie, but they're the ones that get thrown into the prison, and basically get their shit rocked in this weird world, and it's... Yeah, so... And Stallone obviously eventually ends up in the prison, but the thing is that this movie is an hour and a half, and Stallone ends up in the prison like an hour into it, and before then he's just kind of... We just kind of cut back to him occasionally for him to do something that looks like it's progressing the plot, but really it's not a whole lot. And we've got a movie like this, where people brawl in a prison that's out in the middle of nowhere, that's almost got like a sci-fi vibe to it, and you got Batista in it. And what does Batista do? Spends 90% of his screen time staring at computer screens. And another 10, like, standing next to robots. Not as cool as it sounds. And it's one of those cases also to where it's like, it tries to feel like a big action movie. It tries to feel like it's nonstop. Like, it's one of those movies where we cut to a scene that's, like, we see Stallone doing something, then we have a big scene in the prison, and then we just cut, and we're mid-action scene with Jesse Eisenberg having a car chase with somebody. There's, like, we got no opening context to this car chase. We just cut to it while it's already happening. And so... And on top of stuff like that, there's also stuff like when Stallone and Batista get into a gunfight at one point. Not with each other, because that would be too cool. But they're just fighting off random dudes that just broke into this building while they were interrogating somebody. But the thing is that this just seems to spontaneously happen. There's no build-up to it. And it's like, it feels like every action scene is like from something else. Like, it doesn't, you feel like they're going for the vibe of like, feeling like it's non-stop. Like, after there's the car chase, there's the gunfight, and then they'll be fighting in prison again. But it's like, it doesn't feel like one non-stop movie. It feels like you can't stop flipping the fucking channels. And you're just watching a bunch of different shit at the same time. And just nothing lines up at all. And there's like hardly any entertainment value whatsoever to this. Because of that lack of cohesion. And, yeah, if there's one thing that, like, a prison movie really doesn't need, it's over-elaborate effects, especially with a straight-to-DVD budget. I don't really remember much of this almost futuristic aspect to the first movie, except maybe the appearance of it, sort of like the way the prison and Face Off looked futuristic, even though, apart from the booth, they didn't really do anything all that... out of the ordinary. So, what you have here are, like, these green shock things that basically look like an alien invasion is taking place. This happens quite a bit, and just feels like, it almost feels like the screen is fucked up while you're watching the movie. Like, there's a static problem. I don't know what kind of effect this is supposed to have. It's supposed to be, like, disorienting, or threatening, or what. But, it only succeeds in being annoying. And there's also the whole thing, and they do, like I said, they have the futuristic robots that, like, fix wounds with, like, lasers and shit. I don't know. I don't know why this movie needs this stuff when the concept alone is fine enough. But it really just kind of sets it in this world that, once again, just feels... It's almost like the bigger it tries to be, just kind of the cheaper it looks. Like, every single time they try to do something, it ends up having the opposite effect. Whether that was their intention or not. I don't know. And this is... Yeah, so that's just a problem all the way through. And the biggest problem here is that you hear all this, and that might sound like... That almost sounds weird enough to be entertaining. And it's like, maybe you can take it for what it is. It's a straight-to-DVD prison movie with Sylvester Stallone with all this weird futuristic shit in it. in a place called the Zoo where they all brawl each other, where they're watched over by a dude named the Zookeeper that's the villain. And it's like, the problem with this, though, is you hear that and it sounds like total guilty pleasure material, but the thing is that this movie takes itself so seriously. Like, it is completely straight-faced about everything that it does. And if it's trying to do a tongue-in-cheek thing, it's not coming through at all, because it all just looks completely and totally straight-faced. And that's, like, the real death of it. Like, I remember a one-liner here and there in the first movie, which I haven't seen since it came out in 2013, so I'm really vague, but, it does... I remember it feeling like it sort of had, like, especially with the Schwarzenegger-Stallone kind of banter thing, it felt like... I remember when they blew up Jim Caviezel, one of them said, like, some asshole one-liner or something, and it sort of felt like the type of movie they would have made back then, and kind of had this self-aware way about it. There is nothing self-aware about this movie whatsoever. It is, like... It really seems to take this stupid-ass material seriously, and that's the real death of it. And because of that, like, there was no fun quality to it whatsoever, and I just had it, like, I just could not get into this to save my life whatsoever. And the weird thing about this, it does seem to, like, just end, just really abruptly, just like that. And that's when you look into it and you realize that before they had even started on this one, I think, or when they were just getting started on this one, Stallone had already basically confirmed a third one. So, I don't know what their plan is with this, if this is gonna be, like, a whole thing. But, I don't see this going well, if they're gonna try to make this, like, a whole continuing thing, so I guess we'll see what happens, but I am not particularly optimistic, unfortunately, so... Yeah, so that's pretty much all that was. It absolutely 100% was a straight-to-DVD movie, for sure. Regardless of the star power it may have looked like it had, it doesn't matter in the long run, it really doesn't. So, let's kind of switch gears and go into a couple of totally different movies from these. Starting with Life of the Party. It's Melissa McCarthy or Amy Schumer. For me, that's not a particularly... It's kind of a lose-lose situation. So, we'll start with Life of the Party, where we have Melissa McCarthy, once again, kind of doing her thing. Like, there's the thing everybody accuses her of doing, where she's, like, the one type of character, doing the same kind of pratfalls and all that. But there are those movies every now and then, like Spy, to where they kind of make you think that's what it's going to be, but then they subvert it, and they end up making something that's actually really good, and really entertaining, and really funny, believe it or not. But then she always seems to find her way back into pieces of shit like this. And there is a culprit, for sure. That's not her, but we'll get to that. But you can kind of tell immediately that she's back to that kind of territory just by the way this movie starts. Because it's her and her husband Matt Walsh taking their daughter to college and dropping her off, and they're saying their goodbyes and all that, and this is the farthest... She's only 20 minutes away, but it's still, like, the farthest away she's ever been, or something like that. So, despite the fact that they don't seem like they'd ever get along whatsoever, apparently they're super duper close, I guess, so we don't really go much into that. But, yes, so this has scenes at the very start where Melissa McCarthy gets to, like, have a meltdown, and, like, her reaction to bad news is to, like, get out of the car and then open the car door and walk away. Everything in the first introductory scene here is as directionless as that one moment with the car door. It's like an omen. So... And as this scene happens, because it seems like we're getting two different scenes here. It's the scene where they drop the daughter off at college, but then immediately Matt Walsh says, by the way, I want a divorce, and then she has another meltdown. And I think the comedy of the scene is supposed to come from the fact that it was so abrupt. Like, he didn't wait at all, he just let it all out right then and there in this moment. I think that's the point of the scene, that's where the comedy's supposed to be. But the trouble is as you watch just how messy the scene is. Like I was talking about, I dwelled on the car door thing. That just, for some reason, it just really bothered me. It just really set up this movie is just doing whatever it's going to do with no regard to any kind of structure to this scene. And it's like, as they're doing this scene, this divorce scene, the college is still right here in the background. And it's like, I don't see this as the joke being that he abruptly laid it on her and we're right into this in the same moment. It's almost like they were trying to like pinch pennies on sets. And it's like, you know what, let's just go ahead and do this scene here since we're already here. And it just felt really cheap and weird and lazy, like the rest of the movie does. And so, like, we're in, like, Tammy and the boss territory and all that stuff. And it really kind of doesn't let up from there. So, I'm watching all this play out, and it's like, who's responsible for this? Like, who would let scenes play out this sloppy, this shitty, this unfunny? And then it's like, oh yeah, because the very next scene is her getting an Uber home. And who plays the Uber driver? The director and co-writer himself, Ben Falcone. The guy who is married to Melissa McCarthy in real life, and also makes all the shitty movies that she's in. And I talked about this with Tammy at great length, I believe, which basically in a nutshell was, this is the guy that's married to her, he writes the scripts with her, and so, yeah, because he loves her in real life, he's gonna think that everything she does and says is hilarious. Sure, because that's what happens. That's the way you see that person. The trouble is there's a whole, like, millions and millions of people audience that are also looking at this that don't see her in that way. Even if they're fans of hers, obviously they're not going to see her the way he does. So not every single thing that comes out of her mouth or every single movement she makes is going to be comedy gold, believe it or not. But that's the thing, is not only is there, like, more of that than there is funny scenes, it's just kind of a total absence of funny scenes. It's just this stuff the whole time. Because we go into this next scene right after this, they just flow relentlessly, one right after the other. Meeting her parents, who are Stephen Root and Jackie Weaver. They always, Dan Aykroyd was her dad and Tammy. It's like, why do they go all out with getting decent people to put in this stuff? Just for these really throwaway parts that just end up making the actors embarrass themselves. There's something involving, for half this scene, they're just screaming about ham. They're screaming about ham, and they're talking about screaming about ham. Is what this scene is. Stephen Root and Jackie Weaver are doing this, okay? And then there's the moment where, like, Stephen Root ends up with a gun for some reason, just making this scene as directionless as possible. You have Jackie Weaver doing the Cloris Leachman from Bad Santa thing. She keeps talking about making sandwiches. Like, that's just a shameless lift of a joke. But the funny well, not funny, but the funny thing about that is that with them doing this joke that was in Bad Santa of just Jackie Weaver keeps saying, you know, I should make sandwiches, I should make ham sandwiches or something. Her character, we see her a few more times, and she's never like that again. Like, the joke in Bad Santa is that that's the characters. They just keep saying that throughout the whole movie. And that was the whole thing about Cloris Leachman's character, was making sandwiches. Jackie Weaver does it once. It's her trait for one scene. And then just never again. I cannot stress enough the word directionless in regards to this movie and the scenes that play out this way. So, let's go on to what the actual plot of the movie is. To where she decides that they blatantly drop in dialogue with Matt Walsh that she dropped out of college and she didn't graduate. So, she decides that she's going to remain closer to her daughter, because this seems like there should be parting. If the farthest away they've ever been is 20 minutes, this is probably going to be healthy for them. But no, the whole idea of the movie is that she never goes away. They never ever part. Not even 20 minutes away. So she goes back to college and gets to do the whole thing. But the trouble is oh, she's from a different time period, and she is the way that she is, so of course that's going to clash with modern-day college youth, or whatever. So, and you can just imagine the one-joke idea and all the directions it goes from this point on till the very end. Another thing you can look at here is, like, audience perspectives. Because it's like, if you get the older people in the audience, they'll see it from Melissa McCarthy's perspective, and it'll be like, oh, that the youth is weird and all that, and they'll get comedy out of it that way. And then the younger audience members will be like, oh, the Melissa McCarthy character is like so out of her element, which is apparently hilarious or something, or supposed to be. But the thing is that the McCarthy character is so out of it that there's no other way to see it than from the teenager's perspective, to where she's the weird one. And, like, anybody surely would see it this way, because you've got this one joke character that just has no self-awareness whatsoever, which is always, like, the huge weakness in these Melissa McCarthy characters that are like this. Just completely and totally lacking self-awareness. But the thing also is that it's like, maybe the way she acts maybe would make more sense if they changed the time setting. Like, instead of her being from whatever time she's from to now, it's more like set the movie in the early 80s so that she comes from, like, the late 50s or something. And it would maybe, possibly make a little more sense. But that's the thing, is that she doesn't even seem like she's from her own time period. She just seems so incredibly lost in this almost supernatural way to her surroundings and the world around her. And maybe there would be comedy here, maybe from a different actress, maybe from a different setup, certainly from different writing. There would be something here. But no, it just feels weirdly mismatched in the wrong way. Obviously, it's supposed to feel mismatched to an extent, but there's just nothing here. It's just weird, if nothing else. And when you have this, you have stuff like, okay, there's a scene where she's walking through a classroom, and she's, like, seeing the people that she's just befriended. So she says, hey, call me on my landline. And it's like, yeah, we get it that she's out of touch with today, but here's the problem, is I don't think anybody ever fucking said that. So it's like, instead of her saying, like I don't even know how you could do that joke without it, because you could, like, you'd have to, like, double down. You'd have to have a separate scene that's a punchline for this one line, to where she says, like, call me, just call me. And so it's like, she has, like, I don't know, because she never has a fucking landline in this anyway. But my point with the landline line is the fact that it obviously has no context here whatsoever. They just made her say it that way to underline the joke, she's out of touch, even though it makes no sense in regards to what we're actually looking at. And that's just, like, once again, that's just a symptom to what the movie's problem is. It's like, you see that one thing and you're like, okay, I get it. I get why this movie won't work right away, based on one joke, based on one line. and yeah, but the movie's like an hour 45, so we've got plenty to go. She's got a friend played by Maya Rudolph, and I had heard positive things about Maya Rudolph going on to this. I'm going to go ahead and assume that's just because of who she is. Like, that was fans of Maya Rudolph saying that. Because, great as Maya Rudolph can be, she's stuck in the same movie and can't get out of it. She's the side character, the best friend character, to where it's like, funny means turning up the volume and screaming your lines. That's all she has to do. So, she really didn't do anything, I think, to elevate any sort of material, and didn't do anything to, like, make bright spots out of this already piece of shit, so that's unfortunate. And we watched this, and like I said, it's like, it doesn't feel like we're watching somebody that's out of touch with youth. It feels like we're watching somebody that's out of touch with reality, which is a problem, because I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be one and not necessarily the other, but ultimately they got to that point. And it just ends up feeling sort of like the House Bunny with a different kind of idiotic personality at its center. That's basically what it is. I know people like the House Bunny, but I assure you this is significantly worse, and I don't even care for the House Bunny, so that says something. And so, I talk about this, so it might sound like there's not a whole lot to work with here, it's just a one-joke idea. So the thing is that the movie basically runs out of resources by the hour mark. Like, we've already had, like, the first party and all that. But the thing is like, well, no, it's not even necessarily an hour in. There's still an hour left when it feels like we've run out of everything. So what we do is we have a dance scene, a hazing scene, a scene where chocolate is passed around at a party with nobody knowing it has weed in it. All these things we've seen before, all these things that are clearly put in just to fill in time, and for some reason make it an hour 45. There's a pointless cameo, because of course there is, a musical cameo, and yes, and then ultimately, finally, we get towards the end of the movie, we're getting to what the big finish is going to be, and when you know it, they find a way to make it to where they have to party for the sake of the plot. Just everything here is totally unfortunate. And there's really nothing that they clearly did not have enough for an entire movie, yet they somehow got to an hour 45 in all the predictable ways. So there's also the whole subplot about the younger guy, and then there's a twist on that, but that's, once again, the payoff comes way too early, and then every time it comes back up after the payoff has happened just feels like, why are we still doing this? Which is pretty much your thought process as the movie goes on, just the whole time, why are we still doing this? In fact, I can say that right now in regards to talking about it. Why the fuck am I still talking about it? So let's stop here and go to the last movie, which is, I Feel Pretty, the Amy Schumer movie. I don't necessarily... I'm not, like, an Amy Schumer fan. I thought she was charming enough in, like, Snatched, but I didn't really care for Trainwreck. But overall, I'm not really a fan. But I'm also not one of the, like, I don't necessarily hate her. I've never watched her stand-up or anything. If I watched her stand-up, maybe I would, from what I've heard, I don't know. But I'm certainly not one of those people, like, those weird dudes out there that, like, obsessively hate her. Not even close to that, but I wouldn't call myself a fan either, so... naturally, we have this plot that predictably has been compared to Shallow Hal quite a bit, where she thinks that she's... I was talking to somebody who actually said that they thought she was totally miscast, and maybe this would have been more like a Melissa McCarthy vehicle. But to where it's like, maybe Amy Schumer's not a supermodel, but her whole shtick is to, like, totally overblow how maybe not exactly conventionally attractive she may be, or whatever. But yeah, that's the whole premise of the movie, is I guess we're supposed to think she's ugly, but then she hits her head and thinks she's basically a supermodel. And then that's the way she sees herself, but everybody else sees her as her. And like I said, it feels like they really need to have somebody that's... Once again, I'm not saying Amy Schumer's some knockout or anything, but it does seem to be like... The way people react to the thing that she does in this movie just feel overblown for the sake of the concept, as opposed to how this would play out. So once again, there's just kind of a problem there right from the get-go, but... Going on that, this all starts with her basically wishing by way of a fountain that she was beautiful. And it's like, the last time we had a romantic comedy that started with wishing in a fountain, it was When in Rome, one of the worst comedies ever made. So that was kind of... My expectations were like slowly going even farther down than they already were. But yes, then the concept kicks in. And I don't know if the fountain's supposed to be related to this or not. She also gets inspired to do it by watching Big, the Zoltar scene, so... Yeah, but then once she realizes this, it starts to feel more like... It sort of like has the Heaven Can Wait approach, to where we don't actually see the way she sees herself. She just kind of looks in the mirror and just, like, runs her hands over herself, and it's like we get the sense that she sees herself differently now, and we just kind of have to take her word for it. And occasionally they do something a little funny, with not like laugh out loud funny, but like the way they present this, like when she walks into a room and it's like in slow-mo and there's music playing, like, you know, She's All That and stuff like that. But then we get like a distant shot of her doing that same walk and it's just to silence, to kind of show off that how she sees herself versus what she actually looks like, even though we're seeing her the same way regardless. They try to do it with like camera tricks to show off the difference, as opposed to, like, casting a different actress or something like that to show how she sees herself or whatever. Which is a clever enough way to do it, but once again, it still doesn't feel like it's adding up to something, so... Yes, and then we go on, and then we have the, much like Big, it takes the approach of she ends up getting a job, because her boosting confidence now, she ends up getting a job at this place and basically, like, helps in revamping the company's entire image. Much like in Big, when Josh basically refaced the toy company, more or less. Also, the magazine in 13 Gone 30 feels very similar to that, too. And her idol is what draws her to this company, and that is a very interestingly cast Michelle Williams, who her casting is interesting to the point, kind of like, in the same way that Tilda Swinton was in Trainwreck, where they're kind of really playing this other kind of type, and she kind of plays like this almost airhead model type, but she's also... Like, there's clearly something majestic about her that people like Amy Schumer's character would be drawn to. See, just her presence here alone is very interesting, and she does sell the character enough. But it's really more just the fact that she's in it is what draws you to it, draws you to the character as opposed to what the character is actually doing. And then, of course, we have a very sudden romance here. Like, she has an awkward encounter with a dude where we kind of think this will be... Like, this is her first real encounter with a human being when she's had this shift in mind or whatever. So we think it's just going to be this awkward run-in that's just kind of a one-off thing, and then they part ways. But no, this is going to be her love interest, this guy. And with the way this starts, it all feels very abrupt. And when they get to the more romantic aspects of the movie, it feels like, really, are these people here already? This feels very like it's kind of... It's weirdly feels rushed. Yet this movie is, like, almost 2 hours. I don't know how that came to be, or how we ended up getting to that point. But the thing is also that the reason this romantic subplot doesn't work, their chemistry is fine enough, but the problem is that it's more like their scenes, despite the setup, which should give these romantic scenes a bit of a unique quality to them, like, to kind of go along with the concept... but no, they never really bring that in much. Like, it still just kind of feels like we're just watching some really generic, conceptless romantic comedy, but she's basically talking about herself ironically, which we could totally see an Amy Schumer character doing. So there is just nothing to these romance scenes whatsoever. They just look like they're from any other movie with hardly anything special about them, just that she's overly confident. But once again, they just really don't do anything that unique with that or make it feel like it's its own thing. It's just kind of a portion of the movie we have to trudge through like most of the rest of it. And I can't remember, as far as laughs go, like I said, there is the whole concept of the way she's shot and the music, which is like once. But, I mean, I really can't remember a laugh-out-loud moment in this almost 2-hour comedy. And they do try. The scenes with, like, her co-worker, where it's basically, like, we're just, like, every scene is just crickets. But they do it like, fat guy isn't wearing pants. Hilarious. Fat guy's taking a shit. Hilarious. It's that kind of stuff with this character. And so, like I said, just crickets. Like, no laughter whatsoever. Not even close. And then we have her friends, who are Busy Phillips and A.D. Bryant from Saturday Night Live. And they seem like they're going to have a purpose. And it's like to kind of show the way she's going to change as a character, but they just kind of keep disappearing for very long periods of time, and only appear again when it's time for conflict. And then they come back just in time to wrap everything up nicely. So that felt kind of pointless and a waste of them. So, yeah. And so the whole thing in general, like, the movie's biggest problem is that with this very generic romance thing going on, which, like I said, does not really do anything to embrace the concept, and with just being totally laughless, the weird thing about this movie, the really, really weird thing, is that it feels a lot of the time like just nothing is happening. I mean, yeah, the romance is going, and yeah, the company thing is going, but I mean, still, I just kind of, just watching it just felt like it was going nowhere, really. I mean, technically these things are progressing, but it just did not feel like this will be one of those movies that I watched that I probably a week from now, if that, I probably won't remember a single thing about. Like, not even one scene. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I'm not too upset about that necessarily or anything. It's not like there's anything to remember, but yeah, I mean, I suppose it's trying to be. It seems like it's genuine enough with what it's trying to say in regards to how we, view, how we prioritize looks over, who a person really is or whatever. But I mean, since when has that been anything original to talk about? And since when has anybody had an original thought about anything like that? Yes, it's a very age-old thing, and but like I said, it does feel like it's genuine about how it feels about that, which can take that pretty far, but I mean, still, there's, you just don't really do much with it, so, and yeah, and obviously, if you use the cliche, like, yes, to go into this, it does end with her on a stage, in front of a crowd, giving a speech. So it's like, I don't know when the last time all this stuff worked was, but it has not been recent. So that's what this week was. We're continuing sequel summer next week with Sicario, and we'll see what else there is. And so, yes, and then a couple of planned verses already, and we'll see where all that stuff goes. So until all that stuff,